Imagine one of history's greatest minds, a philosopher whose ideas shaped Western thought for millennia, yet he never wrote a single word down. Why would someone so brilliant, so influential, intentionally avoid writing? This isn't just about ancient history. It's about a radical approach to knowledge that challenges everything we think we know about learning and legacy. Tonight, I'm taking you to afternoon in Athens, 417 BCE, to experience a philosophical encounter that will never be recorded. To understand why the man asking questions in the marketplace believed that writing down wisdom was like trying to capture breath in a jar, and why that belief shaped Western thought for the next 2,000 years. The limestone steps are warm under your sandals. The sun is past its peak, but still fierce enough that most people stay in the shade of the stoa, the covered walkway that runs along the agora's edge. You can hear him before you see him. That voice, not loud exactly, but persistent, asking questions, always questions. A small crowd has gathered, maybe a dozen people. Some merchants have left their stalls to listen. A few young men sit at his feet. One older man stands with his arms crossed, clearly annoyed. Socrates is uglier than you expected. The statues lied. His nose is flat. His eyes bulge slightly. His belly protrudes over his simple Hematian. He's barefoot. Always barefoot, people say, even in winter. He's talking about justice or beauty or knowledge. The topics blur together when he speaks because he never really answers anything. He just keeps asking and asking until whoever he's questioning realizes they don't actually know what they claimed to know. The man with crossed arms is getting frustrated. You can see it in his shoulders, in the way he shifts his weight. Socrates has just demonstrated that this man, a successful trader, cannot actually define what makes a transaction fair. The man sputters. Someone in the crowd laughs. Socrates doesn't smile. He just asks another question.
There are no scrolls here. No one is taking notes. Socrates won't write this conversation down later. Neither will anyone else, probably. This moment will evaporate like morning dew on these limestone steps, and Socrates prefers it that way. He trusts disappearance more than permanence. He believes in conversations that die when the speakers part, in knowledge that must be earned fresh each time, in wisdom that cannot be copied or purchased or stored. This is the great paradox. We are talking about Socrates tonight because other people wrote about him, extensively. Plato, his most famous student, wrote dozens of dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character. Xenophon, a soldier and historian, wrote multiple works describing Socratic conversations. Aristophanes, the comic playwright, put Socrates on stage in The Clouds. We have more surviving ancient texts about Socrates than we have about most Greek writers who actually wrote. His silence generated more words than other people's libraries. But Socrates himself never wrote anything. Not one sentence, not one word that we can verify came from his own hand. In a society that was falling in love with literacy, where writing was transforming politics and commerce and culture, Socrates stood in the marketplace and spoke. Only spoke. He talked himself to death, literally. The trial that condemned him involved spoken accusations and spoken defenses, and even then, at the end, facing execution, he didn't write a memoir or a final statement. He just kept talking to whoever would listen. Why? That's what we're here to understand. Not just what Socrates thought about writing, but what his refusal tells us about knowledge itself, about how ideas survive, about whether wisdom can be captured in symbols on a page, or whether it only exists in the living exchange between minds. The question matters because we live in a world drowning in written words. Text messages, emails, articles, books, posts, comments, everything recorded, everything permanent, everything searchable. We've solved the problem that worried ancient people, the problem of preserving ideas across time. We can write down everything. We do write down everything. And yet, somehow, we might have lost something Socrates understood. Something about the difference between information and wisdom, between reading someone's words and actually talking with them.
Let me take you deeper into this, into the streets of Athens where philosophy was born, into the mind of a man who changed history by refusing to write it down. Athens in 417 BCE was loud. You need to understand this first. The agora, the marketplace that serves as the city's center, is packed with bodies and voices. Merchants calling out prices, customers arguing, politicians making speeches, religious processions with flutes and drums, the bang of hammers from metalworkers, the scrape of chisels from sculptors, dogs barking, donkeys braying, children running between stalls. The city is a constant assault of sound and smell. Sweat, olive oil, fish, incense from the nearby temples, the sharp tang of fresh-dyed cloth, human waste from the chamber pots emptied into the streets, flowers from the garland sellers, roasting meat from the food stalls. Athens assaults all your senses simultaneously. The buildings are mostly mud brick, whitewashed with tile roofs, simple and practical. But scattered throughout are marble temples, their painted columns brilliant in the sun. The Parthenon dominates the skyline, still relatively new, its sculptures so fresh they haven't weathered yet. The contrast is stark, divine stone surrounded by human clay. Socrates moves through this chaos like a rock in a stream. The noise flows around him. He is in his 50s now, old by ancient standards, but vigorous. He walks slowly. He stops to talk with anyone, a slave carrying water jars, a wealthy aristocrat in fine robes, a prostitute, a general. To Socrates, they're all potential conversation partners, all potentially wise or potentially foolish, regardless of their status.
As we walk these streets with him, and if you're finding yourself drawn into this ancient world, subscribe for more immersive journeys into how historical figures actually lived and thought. He doesn't seek out specific people. The conversations find him, or he finds them by asking simple questions that turn complex. What is courage? He might ask a soldier. What makes an action just? He might ask a judge. The questions sound naive. They're not. They're traps, carefully constructed to reveal that the person answering doesn't actually understand the concept they're discussing. The weather today is typical for late summer. Hot, dry, the sun bleaches everything. The marble temples shine almost painfully bright. Most people wear light chitons, single pieces of cloth pinned at the shoulders. Socrates wears his clothes year-round, never changing with the seasons. He's famous for his indifference to physical comfort. He fought in 3 military campaigns, people say, and never complained about cold or heat or hunger. He just kept asking questions. The literacy rate in Athens is rising, but still limited. Maybe 10 to 15% of adult males can read and write, according to estimates based on pottery inscriptions and voting patterns. Women are rarely literate, slaves almost never. Reading and writing are specialized skills, associated with commerce and administration more than philosophy or poetry. Most literature is still experienced orally. Homer is recited, not read. Theater is performed, not published. When politicians make laws, they're read aloud in the assembly. The written version exists for record-keeping, but the law lives in its speaking. The same is true for philosophy. Before Socrates, Greek philosophers wrote, but their texts were meant to be read aloud, performed. The idea of silent reading, of private consumption of text, is still rare and strange.
Socrates grew up in this world where speaking was primary and writing was a tool. His father was a sculptor, his mother a midwife. Both professions involved hands-on skill, knowledge passed through demonstration and practice, not through books. Socrates learned to think in conversations, not in texts. His education, like most Greeks of his generation, was musical and physical. He learned to recite poetry, to play the lyre, to fight with shield and spear. Reading and writing came later, if at all. The agora, where Socrates spends his days, is the center of everything. Not just commerce, but politics, religion, and philosophy. The painted stoa, a covered colonnade with murals depicting Athenian military victories, serves as a gathering place for thinkers. Later, the Stoic philosophers will take their name from this place because they taught here. But right now, in Socrates' time, it's just a place to get out of the sun and talk. Socrates has no school, no lecture hall, no formal students in the way later philosophers will have. He just talks to whoever engages him. Some young men follow him around regularly. Plato is one of them, though Plato is probably a teenager right now, watching and learning. Alcibiades, the brilliant and reckless politician, sometimes joins these conversations. Xenophon will later. The group is informal, voluntary, unpaid. Socrates charges nothing. He owns almost nothing. He lives simply supported by his wife's family, apparently, though the domestic details are murky in the sources. What's clear is that Socrates makes himself available. Anyone can approach him. Anyone can ask questions or be questioned. This accessibility is crucial. Philosophy for Socrates isn't something done in private, in a library, in written study. It's public, it's social, it's alive.
The conversations follow a pattern that becomes famous enough that later Greeks have a name for it, the Socratic method. Socrates asks someone to define a concept. The person offers a definition. Socrates asks clarifying questions that reveal problems with the definition. The person revises. Socrates finds problems with the revision. This continues until the person either admits they don't actually know what they're talking about, or gets angry and leaves, or occasionally, rarely, actually achieves some genuine insight. The method is frustrating, deliberately frustrating. Socrates compares himself to a gadfly, stinging the lazy horse of Athens into awareness. He compares himself to a midwife, his mother's profession, helping people give birth to ideas they didn't know they carried.
He never claims to teach. He claims only to help others discover what they already know but have forgotten or never articulated. Watch him work. The conversation we interrupted earlier is still going. The trader has been trying to define justice in commercial transactions. He started with something simple. Justice means giving equal value in exchanges. Socrates pointed out cases where equal value doesn't seem just. The trader revised. Justice means following the agreed-upon price. Socrates asked about agreements made under duress. The trader revised again. Justice means honest agreements. Socrates asked what honesty means. The trader is now stuck, realizing that honesty is as hard to define as justice, and they're going in circles. But here's what's important. Socrates isn't lecturing. He isn't explaining what justice really is. Maybe he doesn't know either. What he's doing is demonstrating that confident claims to knowledge often rest on unstable foundations. That most people live their lives using words without understanding what those words actually mean. That wisdom begins with acknowledging ignorance.
This approach requires presence. It requires back and forth. It requires Socrates to respond to specific answers, to adjust his questions based on what the other person says. You cannot do this in writing. A book cannot hear your response and adapt. A text cannot clarify when you misunderstand. Writing is static. The Socratic method is dynamic. It lives only in the moment of conversation. The sun is lower now. The angle of light has changed. The marble columns cast long shadows across the agora. The crowd around Socrates has shifted. Some people left, others arrived. The conversation continues. The traitor has given up and walked away, frustrated but thoughtful. A young man has taken his place, asking about courage. Socrates begins again, asking questions, never answering. The dialectic continues, and none of this will be written down, at least not by Socrates. This specific conversation, these specific questions, these specific moments of frustration and insight will die with the sunset. They'll live only in the memories of those present. And for Socrates, that's perfect. That's how it should be. Because wisdom isn't something you capture and store. Wisdom is something you do, something you practice, something that exists only in the activity of thinking together. This is what we need to understand about Socrates' refusal to write. It wasn't a rejection of literacy per se. It wasn't technophobia. It was a philosophical commitment to a specific understanding of what knowledge is and how it works. For Socrates, real knowledge cannot be transmitted like data. It must be generated through dialogue. It must be earned through the hard work of questioning and being questioned. It must be alive.
Writing, from this perspective, doesn't preserve knowledge, it kills it. Writing turns living thought into dead text. It creates the illusion that you can capture wisdom in symbols, that you can own it, that you can consume it without the work of genuine thinking. Writing lets you believe you understand something just because you've read about it. But reading, for Socrates, isn't understanding. It's just exposure to someone else's words. The marketplace is beginning to empty as evening approaches. Shops close. People head home for dinner. Socrates will probably continue talking until dark. He always does. And tomorrow he'll return. Same place, same method, same refusal to write anything down. Day after day, year after year, until the day his philosophical questioning leads to political accusations and Athens puts him on trial for corrupting the youth and introducing new gods. Even then, even facing death, he won't write. He'll speak in his defense, and when sentenced to drink hemlock, he'll spend his last day in prison talking with friends about the immortality of the soul, not writing about it, talking. The conversation continues until his death, and then, only then, do his students pick up their pens and try to preserve what couldn't be preserved. They try to capture in writing what Socrates believed couldn't be captured, and in that irony lies the entire problem and promise of philosophy. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let's stay in this moment. This afternoon, this conversation, this living philosophy exists only as long as people are willing to engage with it. Let's understand what Socrates saw that made him distrust the written word.
The written word was still relatively new in Socrates' lifetime. That's easy to forget. We think of ancient Greece as literate, and it was compared to earlier societies. But alphabetic writing had only been in wide use for a few centuries. Homer had composed his epics orally, possibly without writing. The earliest Greek philosophical texts, written by figures like Heraclitus and Parmenides, date from the century before Socrates. Writing was a technology still in its adolescence, and Socrates witnessed its effects with fresh eyes. What he saw worried him. Writing was changing how people thought, not just what they thought, but the actual process of thinking. When you commit something to writing, it becomes fixed. The words are set. You can revise them, but only by creating a new written version. The text itself doesn't change. And this fixity creates problems. First, written words cannot defend themselves. If someone misunderstands what you've written, the text can't be clarified. If someone questions your argument, the text can't respond with a better argument. If someone takes your words out of context, the text can't provide context. Writing is vulnerable in ways that speaking isn't. When Socrates speaks, he can see confusion on your face and adjust his explanation. When you read his words, if they were written, you're on your own. Second, writing creates the illusion of knowledge without understanding. You can read a text about mathematics and believe you understand mathematics, but until you can work through problems yourself, solve new equations, apply the concepts in novel situations, you don't really understand. You've just memorized someone else's understanding. Socrates saw this happening with writing. People read philosophical texts and thought they'd acquired wisdom, but they couldn't defend the ideas when questioned. They'd absorbed information without doing the work of genuine thinking.
Third, writing is promiscuous. Socrates' word, reported by Plato. A written text goes everywhere, to everyone, without discrimination. It doesn't consider whether the reader is ready for its ideas. It doesn't adapt to the reader's level of understanding. It just sits there, available to anyone. For Socrates, this was dangerous. Philosophical ideas need to be introduced carefully, in the right order, to minds prepared to receive them. You don't teach advanced concepts to beginners. You don't discuss complex ethics with people who haven't mastered basic logic. But a book doesn't care. Anyone can read it. These concerns weren't just theoretical. Socrates had concrete experiences that shaped his distrust of writing. He lived through the Peloponnesian War, the long, devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta that dominated his adult life. He saw how written laws could be manipulated by clever lawyers. He saw how written propaganda spread ideas that inflamed conflict. He saw how literacy was used by sophists, professional teachers who charged money to teach persuasive speaking, often without concern for truth. The sophists wrote and sold books. They made wisdom a commodity. Socrates found this obscene. The sophists are Socrates' foil. They represent everything he opposes. They charge money for teaching. Socrates teaches for free. They claim to make people wise. Socrates claims only to reveal ignorance. They write books that promise to convey knowledge. Socrates refuses to write. The contrast is deliberate and pointed.
Consider Protagoras, one of the most famous sophists. He wrote books on various subjects, including a text called On the Dodds that questioned traditional religion. The book was so controversial, it was publicly burned in Athens. Protagoras had to flee the city. This is exactly what Socrates warned about. The written word escaped its author's control. Protagoras couldn't explain or contextualize his ideas. The text stood alone, vulnerable to misinterpretation and political attack. Or consider Gorgias, another prominent sophist who wrote elaborate rhetorical treatises. Gorgias argued that persuasion was more powerful than truth, that a skilled speaker could make any argument convincing regardless of its validity. He wrote this down, he taught it, he made it a system. And for Socrates, this was philosophy's corruption. Truth wasn't something you created through clever argument. Truth was something you discovered through honest questioning. You couldn't write down a formula for finding the truth. You had to do the work, person by person, conversation by conversation. Socrates' objection to writing connects to his epistemology, his theory of knowledge. For Socrates, at least as Plato presents him, real knowledge isn't learned from outside, it's remembered from within. The soul has encountered truth before birth, in the realm of pure forms, and learning is actually recollection. This might sound mystical, but the practical implication is clear. No one can give you knowledge. They can only help you discover what you already potentially know. The midwife analogy is crucial here. Socrates' mother was a midwife. She didn't create babies. She helped women give birth to babies they already carried. Similarly, Socrates doesn't create wisdom in his students. He helps them give birth to wisdom they already carry. A midwife needs to be present, responsive, and adaptive. A medical textbook might describe the birth process, but it can't actually help a specific woman through a specific labor. The work requires presence. Writing, from this perspective, is like trying to perform midwifery by correspondence. You could write instructions, but the person reading them would still have to do the actual work alone. And if complications arose, the written instructions couldn't adapt. The text couldn't respond to unexpected situations.
Writing gives you information about how midwifery works, but it doesn't actually help anyone give birth. Philosophy, for Socrates, is similar. He can't write down wisdom and hand it to you. He can only be present with you, asking questions, responding to your specific confusions, helping you work through your specific misunderstandings. The process is personal and cannot be standardized. Every person's path to wisdom is unique. Writing attempts to standardize what cannot be standardized. The sun has set now. The agora is nearly empty. A few torches burn at the entrance to temples. The evening sacrifices are complete. Smoke rises from altars, carrying prayers to gods who may or may not exist. Socrates is still talking, a small group still listening. The conversation has shifted to piety. Someone asked whether the gods love what is pious because it's pious, or whether something is pious because the gods love it. This is the famous Euthyphro dilemma, named after the dialogue where Plato records a similar conversation. The question seems simple, but opens vast theological and ethical problems. Socrates is patient, asking follow-up questions, letting the contradictions emerge naturally.
No one is taking notes. The question and its complexities will survive only if someone remembers them, only if this conversation gets repeated tomorrow to someone else who repeats it to others, until maybe someone like Plato, decades later, writes it down, reshapes it, makes it literature. But right now, at this moment, philosophy exists only in speaking and listening. It's alive, it's fragile, it could disappear completely. And Socrates accepts that. Maybe I prefer it, because disappearance keeps philosophy honest. If your ideas vanish when you stop speaking them, you have to believe them strongly enough to keep speaking. You can't rely on a reputation built on old books. You have to earn your authority fresh each day through the quality of your current thinking. Writing lets you rest on past achievements. Speaking demands constant presence and constant quality. Writing also allows for vanity. You can craft your words carefully, revising until they seem brilliant, creating an artificial version of yourself that's wiser than you actually are. Speaking doesn't allow that. When Socrates speaks, he's fully present and fully vulnerable. If he says something stupid, everyone hears it. If he contradicts himself, people notice immediately. He can't edit his speech in real time. This vulnerability is important. It keeps him honest. It keeps him human. The night deepens. The stars are bright above Athens, the same stars that shine tonight, though we call them different names now and understand their nature differently. Socrates will eventually head home, have a simple dinner, maybe talk more with his wife Xantippe, who history remembers as shrewish, but who might have just been exhausted living with a man who owned nothing and talked all day instead of working. We don't know. Socrates didn't write about his marriage, neither did anyone else, really.
Tomorrow, he'll return to the agora. More conversations, more questions, more demonstrations that confident knowledge is often illusory. The work continues, day after day, year after year, until politics and philosophy collide in 399 BCE, when Socrates is 70 and Athens decides it's had enough of his questioning. But the trial itself revealed something important about Socrates' commitment to the spoken word. He's accused of corrupting the youth and introducing new gods. The charges are political, really, but they're framed as religious and moral. Socrates has to defend himself before a jury of 500 Athenian citizens. Large juries were standard in Athens. The thinking was that large groups were harder to bribe or intimidate than small ones. The trial is entirely oral. The accusers speak, Socrates speaks, there are no lawyers, no written briefs, no documents submitted as evidence, just speeches. The accusers speak first, making their case. Then Socrates responds. In Athens, each speaker gets a timed portion, measured by water clocks. You speak until your time runs out, then you sit down. Simple and brutal. Socrates' defense, his apology, is one of the most famous speeches in Western history. We know it because Plato wrote it down, or wrote a literary version of it, or invented most of it while capturing the spirit of what Socrates said. Scholars debate endlessly how much of Plato's apology reflects what Socrates actually said versus what Plato thought he should have said. We'll never know for certain. That's the problem with oral culture. Everything that survives does so through filters. But what's clear is that Socrates uses his trial to continue doing philosophy. He questions his accusers. He points out contradictions in their charges. He refuses to beg for mercy or appeal to emotion. He tells the jury that if they acquit him on condition he stops philosophizing, he'll refuse. He'll keep asking questions even if it means death. He's committed to the examined life, to constant inquiry, to never accepting answers as final. And he won't write down a prepared speech. He speaks extemporaneously, responding to the moment, true to his method even when his life depends on it.
The jury convicts him, not by a large margin. If 30 votes had switched, he'd have been acquitted, but the verdict stands. Under Athenian law, after conviction, the accuser proposes a penalty, and the defendant proposes an alternative. The jury chooses between them. The accusers propose death. Socrates, in what might be sarcasm or might be genuine belief, proposes that Athens should give him free meals for life as a reward for his service in making citizens examine their beliefs. The jury, unsurprisingly, chooses death. Even then, Socrates doesn't write. He has weeks in prison before the execution. He could write a defense for posterity. He could write down his philosophical system. He could write letters to his followers. He doesn't. He talks. His friends visit. They discuss philosophy. Plato writes about these final conversations in the Phaedo, describing how Socrates spent his last day discussing whether the soul is immortal. Right up until he drinks the hemlock, Socrates is asking questions, testing arguments, pursuing truth through dialogue. This consistency is remarkable. Even facing death, Socrates doesn't abandon his commitment to the spoken word. He trusts that his ideas will survive if they're worth surviving. He trusts his students to carry on the conversation. He doesn't try to control his legacy through writing. He just continues being himself, talking and questioning until he can't anymore.
And here's the great irony. Socrates' refusal to write made him more influential, not less. Because he didn't write, his students had to interpret him, had to think deeply about what he meant, had to argue among themselves about what Socrates really believed. This generative ambiguity kept Socrates alive in a way that writing might not have. Consider how different philosophical schools claimed Socrates as their founder. Plato developed elaborate metaphysical theories about forms and the immortality of the soul, attributing them to Socrates.
Xenophon presented a more practical, down-to-earth Socrates, focused on ethics and self-discipline. The Cynics, followers of Antisthenes, who studied with Socrates, developed a philosophy of radical simplicity and rejection of social conventions, claiming Socrates as their inspiration. The Cyrenaics, followers of Aristippus, developed a hedonistic philosophy focused on pleasure, also claiming Socratic roots. These interpretations contradict each other. They can't all be accurate representations of what Socrates actually believed. But that's precisely the point. Socrates didn't write down a system that would prevent these interpretations. He left space for his students to think for themselves, to take what they'd learned from him and develop it in their own directions. If Socrates had written books laying out his philosophy clearly and systematically, this creative interpretation wouldn't have been possible. The tradition would have ossified around his texts.
Instead, Socrates became whatever his students needed him to be. He became a character in Plato's literary dialogues, a mouthpiece for increasingly complex philosophical ideas that probably went beyond anything the historical Socrates ever discussed. He became a moral exemplar in Xenophon's writings, demonstrating practical virtue. He became an icon of intellectual freedom, questioning authority and accepting death rather than compromising his principles. All these versions of Socrates coexist because the historical Socrates didn't write down a definitive version of himself. This is a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of books that sit unread on library shelves. The immortality of ideas that stay alive because people keep arguing about them. Socrates is still alive in philosophy classrooms today. Students still read Plato's dialogues and debate what Socrates really meant. Scholars still publish competing interpretations. The conversation continues 24 centuries after Socrates' death, precisely because he never tried to end the conversation by writing down final answers. Plato understood this, I think. That's why his writings take the form of dialogues rather than treatises. He didn't write Plato's system of philosophy, laying out his ideas systematically. He wrote conversations featuring Socrates and others, debates without clear winners, arguments that circle back on themselves. The form honors the content. If philosophy is about thinking rather than about conclusions, then philosophical writing should stimulate thinking rather than deliver conclusions.
The most important text for understanding Socrates' attitude toward writing is Plato's Phaedrus. This dialogue is explicitly about writing. Socrates tells the story of Theuth, an Egyptian god who invented writing and brought it to the king Thamus, claiming writing would make people wiser and improve their memory. Thamus rejects this. He says writing will make people more forgetful because they'll rely on external marks instead of developing internal memory. Writing will give people the appearance of wisdom without reality. They'll seem knowledgeable because they've read many things, but they won't have true understanding. This myth is Plato putting Socratic objections to writing into Socrates' mouth. The irony is thick. Plato is writing down Socrates' arguments against writing. But the irony is instructive. Plato isn't simply recording Socrates' words, he's creating a dialogue about writing that demonstrates both the problems and possibilities of philosophical writing. The Phaedrus doesn't give you Socrates' philosophy as a finished product.
It gives you Socrates thinking through a problem and invites you to think along with him. In the dialogue, Socrates compares writing to painting. A painting looks like a living thing, but it can't respond if you ask it questions. It just sits there, showing the same image to everyone. Similarly, writing looks like speech, but it can't adapt or clarify or respond. It's a shadow of living discourse, not the thing itself.
Socrates also worries about memory. In a culture that relied on oral transmission, memory was crucial. People trained their memories extensively. Poets memorized thousands of lines. Legal experts memorized laws. This training developed cognitive abilities that writing makes unnecessary. Why memorize something when you can look it up? But Socrates argues that the process of memorization isn't just about storage, it's about understanding. When you memorize a poem by working with it repeatedly, you understand it more deeply than if you just read it once. Writing allows superficial engagement. Memory requires deep engagement. These arguments have aged both well and poorly. Socrates was right that writing changes cognition. Modern neuroscience confirms that literacy rewires the brain, changing how we process information. Literate people think differently than non-literate people. That's not good or bad, but it is real. Writing does make us rely less on memory. We've outsourced memory to books and now to computers. Whether this is loss or liberation depends on your perspective. But Socrates was wrong, or at least limited, in thinking that writing couldn't support genuine philosophy. Plato proved it. 2,000 years of philosophical writing proved it. Written philosophy can be deep, rigorous, and transformative. You can have genuine insights while reading. Written philosophy isn't as responsive as conversation, but it has other advantages. You can work through a written argument at your own pace, return to difficult passages, build on previous writers' work in ways that would be impossible in purely oral culture.
The question isn't really whether writing or speaking is superior. They're different tools suited to different purposes. What Socrates understood, and what we sometimes forget, is the tools shape our thinking. How we transmit knowledge affects what kind of knowledge we create. Writing enables certain kinds of complexity and systematization that oral culture can't achieve. But oral culture enables certain kinds of flexibility and presence that writing culture loses. In our time, we've moved beyond writing to digital text. Everything Socrates worried about regarding writing applies even more to digital information. We have more information than ever before, and less understanding. We can look up anything instantly, and our memories have atrophied. We read constantly, but often superficially, scrolling rather than studying. The wisdom Socrates pursued, the examined life, the difficult work of genuine understanding, is harder to find in an age of information abundance. But maybe there's also a return to some of what Socrates valued. Podcasts and videos are oral media, closer to Socratic conversation than to books. Online discussions, at their best, can be dialectical, multiple voices testing ideas against each other. The digital age is weirdly both more literate and more oral than the print age.
We write constantly in texts and posts, but we also consume enormous amounts of spoken content. The boundaries between speaking and writing have blurred.
What remains constant is Socrates' central insight. Wisdom isn't information. You can't download understanding. You can't Google your way to an examined life. The work of thinking has to be done personally, actively, with effort and presence. No tool, whether writing or video or AI, can do that work for you. They can assist. They can provide materials to think with, but the thinking itself remains unavoidably personal and unavoidably difficult. This is why Socrates still matters. Not because he had specific philosophical doctrines to teach. We're not even sure what those were. He matters because he demonstrated a way of approaching knowledge, with humility, with constant questioning, with willingness to admit ignorance, with commitment to the hard work of genuine thinking, rather than the easy satisfaction of received opinions. The method survives. That's what Socrates left us. Not answers, but a way of asking questions. Not a system, but an approach. And maybe that's exactly what survives best. Systems become outdated. Specific answers to ancient questions lose relevance. But the question is, how should I live? Never becomes outdated. The challenge to examine your assumptions never loses relevance. The call to genuine understanding never stops being important. We come now to the modern implications. What can Socrates' refusal to write teach us today? In 2025, surrounded by more written and recorded information than any previous civilization, what wisdom can we extract from a man who trusted only the spoken word? First, there's something to be said for ephemerality. Not everything needs to be recorded and preserved forever. The constant documentation of our lives, the endless archiving of every thought and image, creates a kind of cognitive pollution. We're drowning in records of the past at the expense of presence in the moment. Socrates chose to let most of his conversations disappear. He lived fully in each moment of dialogue, not worried about posterity. There's freedom in that.
Social media has made us all publishers, broadcasting our thoughts instantly to networks of followers. But broadcasting isn't conversation. Posting isn't dialogue. The interactions we have online often lack the depth and responsiveness that Socratic dialogue requires. We're talking past each other, performing for audiences, collecting likes rather than understanding. Socrates would probably find our digital discourse simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. Fascinating because of its scale and reach. Horrifying because of its superficiality. Second, there's something to be said for valuing process over product. We live in an achievement culture. We measure success by outputs, books published, papers written, content created. But wisdom isn't an output. Understanding isn't a product you can manufacture and sell. Socrates knew this. He spent his life in process, never claiming to have arrived at final answers. The work was the point. The conversation was the point, not the conclusion. This has implications for education. Modern education is largely about content delivery. Teachers present information, students absorb and regurgitate it on tests. We've optimized for efficiency of transmission. But Socrates would argue we're transmitting the wrong thing. You can't transmit understanding. You can only create conditions where students might develop it themselves. This requires smaller classes, more discussion, more time for genuine questioning. It's inefficient, it doesn't scale, but it might actually produce wisdom. Third,
There's something to be said for embracing uncertainty. Socrates claimed to know nothing except his own ignorance. This wasn't false modesty, it was epistemological humility. He understood how little he actually understood. In our age of expertise and credentials, where everyone is supposed to project confidence, Socratic uncertainty feels almost revolutionary. Imagine a world where experts regularly said, "I don't actually know," or "that it's more complicated than I thought." Imagine if admitting ignorance was seen as wisdom rather than weakness. The scientific method, at its best, embodies Socratic humility. Science advances by questioning, testing, being willing to revise or reject theories when evidence demands it. Scientists are supposed to be committed to truth more than to being right. But science, as practiced by humans, is messier. Ego gets involved. Career interests interfere. Political pressures intrude. The ideal of Socratic questioning is always in tension with human nature's desire for certainty and status. Fourth, there's something to be said for presence. Socrates gave his full attention to whoever he was talking with. He wasn't checking his phone or thinking about his next appointment or mentally drafting his response while you were still talking. The conversation had his complete focus. In our distracted age, this kind of attention is rare and precious. We're physically present, but mentally elsewhere. We're in conversations, but not fully engaged. Socrates' insistence on live dialogue was partly about demanding this kind of presence from both participants. The pandemic accelerated our shift to virtual communication. Zoom meetings replaced in-person gatherings. Classes moved online. Therapy went digital. And we learned something interesting. Virtual communication is better than nothing, but it's not the same as physical presence. Something is lost. Subtle cues, energy, the full three-dimensional reality of another person. Socrates would understand this immediately. The medium matters. How we communicate shapes what we can communicate.
Fifth, there's something to be said for the examined life. Socrates' most famous statement is the unexamined life is not worth living. He said this at his trial, defending his practice of constant questioning. For Socrates, being human means more than just existing. It means thinking about your existence, questioning your assumptions, examining your values, understanding why you believe what you believe. This work is uncomfortable. Most people avoid it. But avoiding it means living according to unexamined assumptions, following conventions without understanding them, being shaped by forces you haven't consciously chosen. Our media environment makes the examined life harder, not easier. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us what to think, what to value, what to desire. Advertising, politics, social pressure, entertainment. The noise is overwhelming. Finding a quiet space to think clearly becomes difficult. Socrates had the advantage of fewer distractions. Athens was busy, but it wasn't designed to capture your attention every waking moment. He could walk, think, talk. We have to fight for that space. But we can fight for it. We can choose to turn off notifications, to read deeply rather than scroll superficially, to have real conversations rather than just exchange information, to sit with difficult questions rather than immediately looking up answers, to examine our own thinking rather than just absorbing others' thoughts. The examined life is still possible. It just requires more intentional effort. Finally, there's something to be said about legacy. Socrates didn't control his legacy. He didn't write his version of events. He trusted that if his ideas were valuable, they'd survive through others. This trust was vindicated. He became one of the most influential thinkers in history precisely because he didn't try to control how people interpreted him. He left space for others to think.
Most of us aren't Socrates. Most of us won't be remembered centuries after we die. But the question of how we want to influence others remains relevant. Do we want to be right, or do we want to help others think? Do we want to win arguments, or do we want to pursue truth? Do we want to broadcast our opinions, or do we want to engage in genuine dialogue? These questions matter not for posterity, but for today, for how we treat the people we interact with, for what kind of conversations we participate in, for whether we contribute to understanding or just add to the noise. Socrates made a choice. He chose presence over permanence, process over product, questions over answers, dialogue over monologue. His choice shaped Western philosophy in ways he couldn't have predicted. It gave us a model of intellectual humility and rigorous questioning that remains valuable 24 centuries later. We don't need to reject writing the way Socrates did. We live in different times with different challenges, but we can learn from his priorities. We can value genuine understanding over mere information. We can practice real listening in our conversations. We can embrace uncertainty rather than fake confidence. We can examine our lives rather than just live them unreflectively. We can recognize that wisdom is something you do, not something you have. The Athenian evening deepens into night. Somewhere in the past, Socrates finishes another conversation and heads home through darkened streets. He said nothing today that will be remembered tomorrow. He's written nothing that will last. He's just been present with people, asking questions, pursuing truth. And somehow, through some alchemy of influence and memory and interpretation, his presence echoes forward to us now.
We close with Socrates in his final hours. The hemlock has been prepared. Prison has been his home for weeks, but today is the day. His friends have gathered. Plato isn't there. He's sick, or so Phaedo tells us. But others are present. Crito, who tried to convince Socrates to escape. Apollodorus, emotional and devoted. Simmias and Cebes, philosophers themselves, eager to discuss ideas even now. The jailer, who has grown fond of this strange prisoner who faces death so calmly. They talk about the soul, whether it survives bodily death. Socrates offers arguments for immortality. The arguments are elaborate, mystical, probably not what the historical Socrates actually said. Plato is writing philosophy here, using Socrates as his voice. But the scene captures something true about Socrates.
even now, he's asking questions, testing ideas, doing philosophy. The sun is setting. Light slants through the prison's small window, gold and gentle. The day is ending. Soon Socrates' life will end. But for now, the conversation continues. Someone raises an objection to his argument. Socrates considers it, revises his position, offers a better formulation. The dialectic proceeds. Finally, the jailer enters with the cup. Hemlock poison, extracted from the plant that grows wild throughout Greece. Socrates asks about the procedure. The jailer explains, drink the poison, walk until your legs feel heavy, then lie down. The poison will work upward from your feet. When it reaches your heart, that's the end. Simple. Relatively painless if you don't fight it.
Socrates takes the cup without hesitation. His friends are crying. He chides them gently. This isn't a time for mourning. If the soul is immortal, he's moving toward truth. If it's not, he's escaping life's troubles. Either way, there's nothing to fear. He drinks. The poison tastes bitter. He makes a face, but empties the cup. Then he walks around the small cell. His friends watch. He's still talking, still making observations about the sensations in his legs. The paralysis begins. He lies down on the bed. The jailer checks his feet. No sensation. The poison is working. Socrates' last words are about a debt. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it, and don't forget. Asclepius is the god of healing. You sacrifice him when you recover from illness. Some scholars think Socrates is making a final joke, death as recovery from life's disease. Others think he's just remembering an actual debt. We don't know. He never explained. He just spoke the words and was silent. The poison reaches his heart. Socrates stops breathing. His friends weep. Plato, writing years later, calls him the best and wisest and most just man of their time. The superlatives might be exaggerated, but the influence was real. And here's what's remarkable. This death, this moment, happened once and ended. Socrates didn't write about facing death. He didn't leave a guide for how to die well. He just died, in his own way, consistent with his values. And yet his death became a model that influenced millions. Philosophers from the ancient Stoics to modern existentialists have returned to Socrates' death as exemplary, not because he described it in writing, because he lived it with integrity.
The story spread through speaking first. Crito told others what he'd witnessed. Other friends shared their memories. The stories circulated through Athens and beyond. Eventually, Plato wrote them down, adding his own interpretations. But the power of Socrates' death came from the fact that people who were there witnessed something genuine, something that couldn't be faked or performed. A man facing death without fear, still committed to truth, still being himself until the end. Writing preserved the story, but living it created the story. And that's the lesson Socrates would want us to take. Life comes first, living with integrity, examining your beliefs, questioning your assumptions, having genuine conversations, being present with others. The writing, if it comes, is secondary.
What matters is how you actually live. In our time, we're obsessed with documentation. We photograph everything. We record everything. We write everything down, or type it up, or post it online. We're terrified that if something isn't recorded, it didn't happen. But Socrates would remind us that the most important things might be precisely what can't be captured. The quality of attention you give someone, the genuineness of your curiosity, the honesty of your self-examination, the courage to admit you were wrong. These things happen in moments and can't be adequately documented. They have to live. So maybe the lesson isn't about writing or not writing. Maybe it's about priorities. Put living first. Put thinking first. Put genuine engagement with ideas and people first. And if writing or recording serves those goals, fine. But if it becomes a substitute for actual thinking, actual presence, actual engagement, then you've missed the point. You've prioritized the shadow over the substance.
Socrates never wrote anything down because he was too busy doing philosophy to write about philosophy. He was too engaged in living the examined life to take time to describe it. He was too present in conversations to step back and document them. This wasn't a principled rejection of all writing for all time. It was a practical choice about how to spend limited time and energy. He chose presence. He chose practice over theory. He chose the work itself over reporting about the work. We can make similar choices, not by abandoning writing, that would be silly and impractical, but by remembering that the map is not the territory, the description is not the experience, the post about an event is not the event itself. And sometimes, maybe often, we serve the truth better by putting down the phone, closing the laptop, and being fully present with whatever's in front of us. Socrates' silence speaks across centuries. His refusal to write wrote itself into history. His commitment to the spoken word resonates even now in written words about his rejection of writing. The paradox is productive. It keeps us thinking, keeps us questioning, keeps the conversation alive. And in the end, that's what Socrates wanted. Not answers, but questions. Not conclusions, but continued inquiry. Not systems, but thinking. The conversation continues. It continued after his death. It continues now as you hear these words. It will continue after we're gone. The examined life isn't a destination, it's a practice. You never finish, you just keep working.
Athens sleeps tonight. The prison is empty. Socrates is gone. But the questions remain. Hovering in the air like the last notes of a song, waiting for someone to pick them up and carry them forward. Waiting for you, maybe, to examine your own life, to question your own assumptions, to engage genuinely with ideas that matter. That's Socrates' legacy. Not books, not a system, just an invitation to think. An invitation we can accept or decline. But it's there, waiting, patient. Like Socrates in the Agora, ready to begin a conversation that might change everything. Ready to ask the question that starts you on the path to wisdom. Ready, always ready,
for genuine dialogue between minds searching for truth. And with that invitation hanging in the air, we let Socrates rest. The questions remain. They always do. But for now, we've explored why he never wrote them down, why he trusted speaking over writing, presence over permanence, the living dialogue over the dead text. Tomorrow, you can pick up those questions and make them your own. But for tonight, we've walked with Socrates through Athens, listened to his questions, and watched him drink the hemlock. Understood, perhaps, why his silence speaks so loudly. The moon rises over ancient Athens, the same moon that rises over your world tonight. Silver light on marble temples, shadows in narrow streets. The city is quiet now. Philosophy resting until morning. When will it begin again? As it always begins again, in conversations between people brave enough to admit what they don't know, curious enough to ask real questions, present enough to listen to real answers.
Tonight, I'm taking you inside a Soviet military bunker south of Moscow on September 26, 1983, to experience the minutes when one man's decision prevented nuclear war. A decision so consequential that billions of people owe their existence to it, yet his name remained unknown for decades. And why that pattern of forgetting reveals something troubling about how we remember history. The alarm is screaming, not a drill alarm, the real one. The sound fills the bunker like physical pressure against your eardrums. Red lights flash across the computer screens. The message is unambiguous. Incoming missile detected. Launch from the United States. Impact estimated in less than 30 minutes. You're not actually there. Stanislav Petrov is. He's 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. This is his shift. He's the duty officer at Serpukhov 15, a secret facility that monitors the Soviet Union's early warning satellites. His job is simple and terrible. If the computers detect an American nuclear attack, he reports it up the chain of command. That report will trigger the Soviet Union's retaliation protocol. Thousands of nuclear weapons were launched, the end of civilization. The alarm continues. The protocol is clear. He should pick up the phone, report the incoming missile, begin the process that ends the world. But something feels wrong. Petrov stares at the screens. One missile? The American strategy, if they attack, would be an overwhelming first strike. Hundreds of missiles, not one. The computers insist it's real. The satellites have detected infrared signatures consistent with missile launch. The system is working as designed. Another alarm. A second missile was detected. Then a third, fourth, fifth. 5 American missiles inbound. The bunker is chaotic now. 30 people working their stations, all looking to Petrov for the call he needs to make. The phone to the Soviet military command is right there. His hand should be reaching for it. The protocol demands it. But Petrov hesitates. Something is wrong. He can feel it, though he can't articulate what. The computers say attack. His instinct says malfunction. He has minutes to decide. Not hours, not days. Minutes. The fate of human civilization rests on whether he trusts the computers or his gut. And the part that makes this moment more terrifying? Petrov was never supposed to be there that night. He was covering someone else's shift. This happened This isn't speculation or historical fiction. This is a documented fact, though the world didn't learn about it for years. And Stanislav Petrov is just one of several people you've never heard of who prevented catastrophic events that would have altered or ended human history. People who made decisions, took actions, or accomplished work that saved millions or billions of lives, and then were forgotten. Not because their contributions weren't significant, but because of how we construct historical narrative, how we remember and forget, and what that forgetting costs us.
Let me take you through these stories methodically. These moments when the world nearly ended or was saved. These people who changed everything and disappeared from memory. Because understanding why they were forgotten might be as important as understanding what they did.
The early warning systems are tense triggers on loaded guns. The Soviets use satellites that detect infrared signatures of missile launches. The satellites orbit constantly, watching American missile bases. When they see the heat bloom of a launch, they report it. Computers process the data. Duty officers like Petrov receive the alerts. The whole system is designed for speed. Nuclear missiles travel fast. Intercontinental ballistic missiles can cross from America to Russia in about 30 minutes. The decision makers need time to respond, so the alerts go out immediately. There's no time for lengthy verification. This is the system Petrov is part of, a system designed to be sensitive, to catch any possible attack, even if that means false alarms. Better a false alarm than missing a real attack. Except, false alarms in nuclear war systems are existentially dangerous. If you cry wolf with nuclear weapons, eventually you might actually launch them. Petrov sits in a bunker about 60 miles south of Moscow. The facility is underground, protected, designed to survive nearby nuclear detonations. The walls are concrete, reinforced with steel. The ventilation system can seal off if radioactive fallout is detected. The bunker has supplies to keep the staff alive for weeks. It's built for the scenario when nuclear war has started, and they need to keep monitoring and coordinating whatever response is still possible. As we settle into this underground command post, and if these historical details are drawing you in, subscribe for more deep examinations of the moments that shaped our world. The bunker normally operates in quiet tension. People working computer terminals, low conversations, the hum of electronics and ventilation. But when the alarm sounds, everything changes. The noise is designed to be impossible to ignore. Petrov described it later as like having a siren inside your skull. The lights flash, everyone's training kicks in. This is what they've drilled for. This is what the entire facility exists to handle.
Petrov looks at the displays. The satellite has detected infrared signatures from Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. This is where America keeps Minuteman missiles, ICBMs capable of reaching the Soviet Union. The computer shows one missile launched, then a few minutes later another alert, second missile, third, fourth, fifth. Each time Petrov has to make the same decision. Is this real? The other officers are looking at him. Some think he should report it immediately. That's protocol. The computers say attack. You report an attack. The decision about whether to retaliate isn't his. That's for the political and military leadership. His job is just to report what the computers detect. Simple. Except if he reports, he starts a chain of events that likely ends with nuclear war. Even if American missiles haven't actually launched, once the Soviet leadership believes they have, the pressure to retaliate becomes intense. You don't wait to see if the missiles hit. You launch your own before your weapons are destroyed. Petrov's training report says. His position in the chain of command says the report. The computers say reports. But his judgment says wait. He looks at the data more carefully. The infrared signatures are strong, but they're from a single satellite. The system has multiple satellites, but only one is reporting the attack. That's unusual. If 5 missiles launched from Montana, other satellites should be detecting them too. The radar systems which track missiles after launch aren't showing anything yet, but radar takes longer. The missiles would need to get higher in their trajectory. Still, the inconsistency bothers him. He thinks about the number. 5 missiles. If the United States launches a first strike, why 5? They have hundreds of missiles. A first strike would be massive, overwhelming, designed to destroy Soviet retaliation capability. 5 missiles make no sense strategically, unless it's a limited strike, a demonstration, but that makes even less sense. You don't demonstrate with nuclear weapons. You either use them or you don't. The clock is running. Every minute he waits is a minute the Soviet Union doesn't have to respond. If this is a real attack, his hesitation could be catastrophic. Soviet missiles need launch orders. Those orders need to travel through military bureaucracy. Waiting too long means the American missiles hit before the Soviets can retaliate. Deterrence depends on assured retaliation. If the Americans think they can destroy Soviet forces before they launch, the whole strategic balance collapses. But Petrov doesn't report. Not yet. He orders his staff to check everything, verify the data, contact ground stations, look for any corroborating evidence. The minutes stretch. The alarms continue. The stress is physical. Petrov is sweating. His heart is racing. Later he describes feeling like everything was happening in slow motion and also too fast to process. The weight of the decision is crushing. If he's wrong, he's failing in his duty. If he's right, he's preventing World War III. No pressure. The radar systems start reporting. They should be picking up the missiles by now if they're real. The radar shows nothing. No missiles in flight. This is the evidence Petrov needs. The satellites detected something, but it wasn't a missile. It was a malfunction. Later investigation reveals what happened. Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds created infrared signatures that the satellite interpreted as missile launches. The system worked as designed, but the design had a flaw. It couldn't distinguish between missile exhaust and certain types of cloud reflections when the sun angle was right.
Petrov picks up the phone. He calls the command center. He reports a system malfunction. False alarm. No attack detected. The alarm stops. The bunker returns to normal operations. The world doesn't end. Billions of people continue existing, never knowing how close they came to not existing. Petrov saves the world and gets reprimanded. This is the part that makes the story more bitter. He didn't follow protocol. He made a judgment call instead of reporting what the computers said. From a military discipline standpoint, he was wrong. What if he'd been wrong about the attack being false? What if those had been real missiles and he'd failed to report? The Soviet military doesn't reward independent thinking. They reward following orders. Petrov's career stalls. He's transferred. He retires early. For years, the incident has been classified. The Soviets don't want to admit how close they came. They don't want to reveal weaknesses in their early warning system. Petrov is sworn to secrecy. The world learns about the incident gradually. Pieces of information leaked out in the late 1990s after the Soviet Union collapsed. Reporters track down Petrov. He's living in a small apartment near Moscow, surviving on a pension. He's not bitter exactly, but he's not celebrated either. He did the most important thing he'll ever do, possibly the most important thing anyone has ever done, and he got in trouble for it and then was forgotten. When the story becomes public, there's some recognition. Petrov receives awards from international peace organizations. He's invited to speak at events. but he remains uncomfortable with the attention. He insists he was just doing his job. He doesn't consider himself a hero. He made a judgment call under pressure, but he thinks anyone would have done the same. This is probably not true. The system was designed to assume the worst. Many officers would have reported the attack. Following protocol is what soldiers do. Independent judgment is rarer than we'd like to think.
Stanislav Petrov died on May 2017. He's 77 years old. His death isn't widely reported immediately. It takes months before international media notices. The man who prevented nuclear war dies in relative obscurity. There's something profoundly wrong about this. His name should be known by every person alive. Every school child should learn about him. But he's a footnote, a curiosity, the man who saved the world and then was forgotten. Now, let me take you to another forgotten hero, a different type of contribution, equally consequential. Viktor Zhdanov, Soviet virologist, instrumental in convincing the World Health Organization to pursue the eradication of smallpox. Without his intervention, smallpox might still exist. The disease killed hundreds of millions of people across human history. It's gone now, eradicated. The only disease we've ever completely eliminated. And most people have never heard of Viktor Zhdanov. The year is 1958. The setting is the World Health Assembly in Minneapolis. This is the annual gathering where member countries of the WHO discuss global health priorities. It's bureaucratic, political, and often frustrating. Nations have different interests. Resources are limited. Getting international cooperation on anything is difficult. Zhdanov is there as part of the Soviet delegation. He's Deputy Minister of Health for the USSR. He's also a serious scientist, a virologist who has worked on vaccine development and disease control. He has an idea that seems impossible. Eradicate smallpox completely. Not control it, not reduce it, eliminate it from the planet.
Smallpox at this time is still killing roughly 2 million people per year. It's endemic in much of Africa, Asia, and South America. The disease is ancient, devastating, and familiar. Smallpox causes fever, rash, pustules that leave scars if you survive. The mortality rate varies, but for the most severe form, variola major, it kills about 30% of infected people. Those who survive are often left blind or disfigured. The disease has no treatment. Once you're infected, you wait to see if you'll be among the 70% who survive. But there's a vaccine. Edward Jenner developed the first vaccine in 1796, using cowpox to provide immunity against smallpox. The vaccine works. People who are vaccinated don't get smallpox. And smallpox only infects humans. It has no animal reservoir. This combination makes eradication theoretically possible. If you vaccinate everyone, the virus has nowhere to go. It dies out. The problem is practical. How do you vaccinate everyone in the world? The logistics are staggering. Many countries don't have functioning health systems. Many communities are remote, difficult to reach. The vaccine requires refrigeration, which many places lack. The costs are enormous. And politically, getting cooperation between Cold War rivals seems impossible. The United States and Soviet Union can barely agree on anything. How would they coordinate a global health campaign? Zhdanov proposes it anyway. He stands before the World Health Assembly and argues that eradication is possible and necessary. He points out that the Soviet Union has eliminated smallpox within its borders through aggressive vaccination campaigns. If it can work in a country as large and diverse as the Soviet Union, it can work globally. He offers Soviet technical assistance and vaccine production. This is partly humanitarian and partly strategic. If smallpox is eradicated globally, the Soviet Union won't need to maintain expensive vaccination programs. The disease can't return if it doesn't exist anywhere. The initial response is skeptical. Many delegates think eradication is impossible. Previous efforts to eliminate diseases have failed. Malaria eradication campaigns in the 1950s were abandoned when they proved too difficult. Why would smallpox be different? The costs seem prohibitive. International cooperation seems unlikely. And some countries resent being told by the Soviets what to do. But Zhdanov is persistent. He builds support. He emphasizes the humanitarian benefits. He works behind the scenes with delegates from multiple countries. He makes the case that this is achievable if there's commitment. The World Health Assembly eventually votes to support a smallpox eradication initiative. The vote is 1958. The program officially begins in 1967, after years of planning and preparation. The campaign that follows is one of the great achievements of human cooperation. It requires unprecedented coordination between nations, including Cold War enemies. American and Soviet scientists work together. Wealthy countries fund programs in poor countries. Thousands of health workers travel to remote villages, tracking down every case, vaccinating contacts, breaking chains of transmission. The strategy evolves. Initial plans focus on mass vaccination, trying to vaccinate everyone in affected areas. This proves too slow and expensive. The program shifts to surveillance and containment. Instead of vaccinating everyone, health workers identify cases and then vaccinate everyone around that case, creating a ring of immunity. The virus can't spread through the ring. This targeted approach is faster and more efficient.
The technology improves. The bifurcated needle, a simple tool that delivers precise doses of vaccine, replaces earlier methods. One person can vaccinate hundreds of people per day with a bifurcated needle. The vaccine becomes more stable, able to survive warmer temperatures. Production scales up. The Soviet Union produces hundreds of millions of doses. So do labs in other countries. The work is difficult. Health workers travel to conflict zones, negotiate with local leaders, and work in extreme climates. They track rumored cases through mountains, deserts, and dense forests. They convince skeptical communities that vaccination is safe. They deal with logistics nightmares, broken refrigerators, washed-out roads, delayed shipments. The campaign requires grinding persistence over years, but it works. Country by country, region by region, smallpox disappears. When a country has no cases for 2 years, it's declared smallpox-free. The number of certified countries increases. Indonesia, Bangladesh, Ethiopia. The remaining endemic areas shrink. By the late 1970s, only a few pockets remained. Somalia has the last endemic case. A hospital cook named Ali Maumalan contracted smallpox in October 1977. He survives. After him, no one else gets smallpox from natural transmission. The disease is gone. On May 8, 1980, the World Health Assembly declared smallpox eradicated. It's the first disease ever eliminated by human effort. The achievement is staggering. A disease that killed hundreds of millions across human history no longer exists in nature. Children no longer need vaccination because there's nothing to vaccinate against. The scars that marked survivors disappear from new generations.
The cost was roughly $300 million, spread over the campaign's duration. The benefit is incalculable. Smallpox would have killed tens of millions more people if not eradicated. The economic benefits from not needing vaccination programs and not treating cases run into billions. The humanitarian benefit is countless lives saved, countless children who didn't die or become disfigured. And Viktor Zdanov, the man who initiated this, who convinced the world it was possible, died in 1987. He's 77. His obituaries in the Western press are brief if they exist at all. He's not unknown in the Soviet Union, but globally he's forgotten. When people discuss smallpox eradication, they mention the WHO, the health workers, sometimes the program directors. Zdanov rarely gets mentioned. His contribution fades from memory. Why? Partly because he was Soviet, and Cold War politics complicated recognition. Partly because credit for long-term programs diffuses across many people. Partly because we don't have good narratives for bureaucratic heroes. Zdanov didn't save someone with his own hands. He convinced committees and organized resources and provided political will. That's harder to make dramatic. But without his initiative, the program likely doesn't happen, or happens later, and millions more die. His forgotten contribution altered human history as profoundly as any military general or political leader, more so actually. Generals kill people. Zdanov saved people, millions of them. Let me take you to another moment when the world nearly ended and one person prevented it. This time, October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. You probably know the basic story. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The United States discovered them. 13 days of crisis. Nuclear war averted. Kennedy and Khrushchev both claimed victory. Crisis resolved through diplomacy.
That's the public version. The version that makes leaders look good. The version that fits the narrative. But the reality was closer to chaos. Multiple times during those 13 days, we came within minutes of nuclear war. And one of those times, the person who prevented it was Vasily Arkhipov, a Soviet submarine officer whose name you've probably never heard. The submarine is a B-59. It's a Foxtrot-class diesel submarine, part of a group of 4 Soviet submarines sent to Cuba during the crisis. The submarines are carrying nuclear torpedoes. This is a secret. The Americans don't know. The submarine crews have authorization to use the nuclear torpedoes under certain circumstances if they lose contact with Moscow and believe war has started. This authorization is terrifying. It means submarine commanders can start nuclear war independently. B-59 is having a terrible voyage. The submarine left the Soviet Union in October, heading for Cuba. The journey is difficult. The submarine runs on diesel engines, which need air. It has to surface or use snorkel depth to run the engines and recharge batteries. But American naval forces are tracking it. Whenever a B-59 surfaces, American ships and planes harass it. The submarine spends most of its time deep, running on batteries, which limit speed and maneuverability. The conditions inside are brutal. The submarine is designed for northern waters, not tropical heat. The temperature inside exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is stale, contaminated with carbon dioxide from crew breathing and diesel fumes. The men are exhausted, sick, disoriented. Water is rationed. Everyone is dehydrated. The submarine has been submerged for days. The crew doesn't know what's happening in the world above. They've lost radio contact with Moscow. They don't know if war has started.
The Americans are trying to force the submarine to surface. On October 27th, the crisis's most dangerous day, U.S. Navy ships located B-59. They begin dropping practice depth charges, small explosives that create loud bangs but don't damage the submarine. The purpose is signaling. We know you're there. Surface now. But B-59 doesn't know these are practice charges. The crew hears explosions. They think they're under attack. They think war might have started. Inside the submarine, the situation is desperate. The captain is Valentin Savitsky. He's at the end of his endurance. Days of heat, stress, and harassment have pushed him beyond rational judgment. He decides to use the nuclear torpedo. His thinking is they're under attack. Probably war has started. They should retaliate while they can. The nuclear torpedo has a 15-kiloton warhead, similar to the Hiroshima bomb. Using it against the American fleet would kill thousands immediately and likely trigger full nuclear war. Soviet submarine procedures require agreement from 3 officers to launch nuclear weapons: the captain, the political officer, and the second captain. Savitsky and the political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed to launch 2 out of 3. One more approval and the weapon is away. The third officer is Vasily Arkhipov. He's the second captain, also known as flotilla commander. He's on B-59 because he's commanding the group of 4 submarines, but he doesn't have operational control of B-59 itself. That's Savitsky's authority. But for the nuclear weapon, Arkhipov's approval is required, and he refuses.
Arkhipov argues against launch. He points out they haven't confirmed war has started. The explosions might not be attacks. They could be signals. The submarine is still intact, not actually damaged. Using a nuclear weapon without clear authorization from Moscow is premature. They should surface, try to establish radio contact, verify the situation before starting a nuclear war. The argument is heated. Savitsky is furious. He's the captain. He wants to launch. Maslenikov supports him,
But Arkhipov holds firm. The procedure requires all 3 officers to agree. He refuses. Therefore, no launch. The submarine stays deep. Eventually, after more hours of harassment, B-59 surfaces. The Americans don't attack. They signal for the submarine to identify itself and leave the area. The submarine does. Crisis averted. The world doesn't learn about this incident for decades. It's classified Soviet military information. The submarine crews are sworn to secrecy. The Americans know a Soviet submarine surfaced, but they don't know how close it came to launching a nuclear torpedo. The crisis is resolved through diplomatic channels. Kennedy and Khrushchev negotiate. The Soviets remove missiles from Cuba. The Americans quietly remove missiles from Turkey. Both sides declare victory. Everyone pretends it was controlled and rational. But B-59's near launch reveals how thin the margin was. Nuclear war almost started not because of careful strategic planning, but because of confusion, stress, and mechanical failure. If the submarine's air conditioning had worked better, if communications hadn't failed, if Arkhipov hadn't been on that particular submarine, the outcome might have been different. This is terrifying. The fate of human civilization came down to the judgment of one exhausted officer in a metal tube under the Caribbean Sea.
Vasily Arkhipov returns to the Soviet Union. His career continues. He's promoted eventually to Rear Admiral. He works in submarine development. He retires. The incident on B-59 is not discussed. Even his family doesn't know the full details. He died in 1998. He's 72 years old. His obituary notes his naval service, but not that he prevented nuclear war. The story emerges slowly. In 2002, at a conference on the Cuban Missile Crisis, participants finally discuss what happened on the Soviet submarines. American officials are shocked to learn how close they came to nuclear war. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, says the lesson from this is that a guy called Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. But Arkhipov is already dead. He never received public recognition during his lifetime. He saved potentially billions of lives and died in obscurity. This pattern repeats. Look at Nils Bohlin, Swedish engineer who invented the 3-point seatbelt in 1959. The modern seatbelt that goes across your lap and over your shoulder. Before Bohlin's design, seatbelts were 2-point lap belts that were uncomfortable and less effective, or they didn't exist at all. Bohlin's design was simple, effective, and easy to use. Volvo, his employer, could have patented it and made billions. Instead, they released the patent for free. They decided saving lives was more important than profit. The 3-point seatbelt has saved over 1 million lives, according to estimates. It's one of the most important safety innovations in automotive history. Nils Bohlin should be famous. Everyone should know his name. We all use his invention constantly, but he's not famous. He died in 2002. His obituaries were brief. Most people who use seatbelts daily never think about who designed them.
Or consider Maurice Hilleman, microbiologist who developed over 40 vaccines, more than any other scientist. Vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, meningitis, pneumonia, and more. His vaccines save approximately 8 million lives per year. 8 million every year. The accumulated total is hundreds of millions of lives saved. He's arguably done more to reduce human suffering than almost anyone in history. Maurice Hilleman died in 2005. He was 85. His obituary ran in major newspapers, but it was short.
Few people recognized his name then. Fewer do now. If you ask random people to name important scientists, they'll say Einstein, Newton, Darwin, maybe Curie. They won't say Hilleman. But his impact on human welfare exceeds all of them. He's not forgotten because his work wasn't important. He's forgotten because vaccine development doesn't make dramatic stories. It's methodical, technical, unsexy work. It saves lives invisibly. Millions of people don't die from diseases they never get exposed to because vaccination eliminates them. How do you recognize the hero who prevented something from happening? This is the problem with preventive heroes. Their success makes them invisible. Petrov prevented nuclear war, so there was no nuclear war. So most people don't think about nuclear war prevention. Arkhipov prevented nuclear launch, so there was no launch. So most people don't know the danger existed. Zdanov initiated smallpox eradication, so smallpox doesn't exist. So younger generations don't appreciate what was eliminated. Hilleman developed vaccines, so diseases don't spread. So people forget diseases were ever threats. We remember destruction better than prevention. We remember wars, assassinations, disasters, catastrophes. We build memorials to tragedy. We teach history through conflicts and crises. The heroes we remember are warriors, leaders, revolutionaries. People who fought or conquered or built something visible. We're not good at recognizing people who prevented suffering, who made dangers not happen, who saved lives through technical competence rather than dramatic action.
There's also the problem of narrative complexity. Individual heroes make good stories. Washington crossed the Delaware, Churchill's speeches during the Blitz, Armstrong stepping on the moon. These are simple, visual, dramatic. One person, one moment, clear achievement. But most historical change is messier. Smallpox eradication required thousands of people working for years. Who's the hero? Everyone and no one. Zdanov initiated it, but D.A. Henderson directed the program. But Henderson had country directors, but they had field workers, but those workers needed vaccine producers. The chain extends until credit diffuses to meaninglessness. Bureaucratic heroism is real, but unrecognized. The person who fights through committees to allocate resources correctly. The administrator who maintains programs through political changes. The technical expert who solves unsexy problems that prevent cascading failures. These people don't get movies made about them, but their work matters enormously. Viktor Zdanov convinced a committee. Thrilling, inspiring. Try making a movie about committee work. Try teaching children to value expertise over drama. We also struggle with probabilistic heroism. Petrov and Arkhipov prevented events that might have happened. We can't know with certainty that nuclear war would have started if they'd made different choices. Maybe other safeguards would have worked. Maybe rational leaders would have stepped back from the brink. Probably not, but maybe. This uncertainty makes their heroism less clear-cut than traditional heroes. The soldier who saves a comrade under fire definitely saved that person. We can see the rescued individual. Petrov saved billions of statistical people who might have died. The achievement is larger, but less tangible. And there's the problem of institutional credit.
Institutions take credit for individual achievements. WHO claims credit for smallpox eradication. The Soviet and American governments claim credit for avoiding nuclear war. Volvo claims credit for automotive safety. These institutions employed the individuals who actually did the work, so they're not entirely wrong. But the individual contributions disappear. Corporations and governments persist. They have public relations departments. They tell their own stories. Individuals die and are forgotten unless someone fights to remember them.
There's something almost perverse about how we assign recognition. Movie stars, athletes, politicians receive enormous attention and reward. Their contributions are entertainment, competition, and governance. Important, sure, but compare the person who entertains millions for 2 hours versus the person who develops vaccines that save millions of lives. Who should be more recognized? Who is more recognized? The disconnect is troubling. Money correlates poorly with contribution. The highest paid people are often entertainers, executives, and financiers. People who develop life-saving vaccines are paid comfortable professional salaries, but not fortunes. Niels Bohrmann could have been a billionaire if he'd monetized his seatbelt design. Instead, he gave it away and remained a salaried engineer. His descendants are not wealthy. The Kardashian descendants will be wealthy. This seems backwards. Fame correlates even more poorly with contribution. Fame requires visibility, publicity, often self-promotion. Scientists and engineers are often not good at or interested in self-promotion. They're focused on their work. They publish in technical journals, not popular media. They present at conferences, not on television. Their achievements are recognized by peers within their fields, but not by the public. This creates a recognition bubble. The people who matter to them know their work. The general public doesn't. And over time, even field recognition fades. Younger scientists know recent work. Historical contributions become footnotes in textbooks. Part of the forgetting is generational. Each generation has limited attention. They focus on their own challenges, their own heroes. Historical figures recede unless there's effort to maintain memory. Effort requires institutions, museums, educational curricula, monuments, anniversaries. These require resources and political will, and the competition is fierce. Whose history gets taught? Whose monuments get built? The decisions reflect power, not necessarily importance. Powerful groups memorialize themselves. Marginalized groups and individuals without institutional backing get forgotten.
There's also the psychology of comfortable forgetting. Remembering near catastrophes is uncomfortable. It reminds us how fragile civilization is, how close we've come to ending, how much depends on chance and individual judgment. We prefer to believe we're safer than we are, that systems work reliably, that disasters are prevented by design rather than luck. Remembering Petrov and Arkhipov means acknowledging we almost died, all of us. That's scary, easier to forget. Similarly, remembering eradicated diseases means acknowledging they could return. Smallpox exists in 2 laboratories, one in the United States, one in Russia. Those samples could be released, accidentally or intentionally.
Bioterrorism is a real risk. As long as the virus exists anywhere, eradication isn't permanent. But thinking about this is anxiety-inducing. Easier to assume smallpox is permanently gone and not think about Viktor Zhandanov or what his work means for ongoing vigilance. We're having a difficult time remembering. Information abundance creates memory overload. We can't remember everything. We have to filter. And the filters are often emotional, visual, immediate. Dramatic disasters get attention. Viral videos spread. Outrage trends. Quiet competence doing important work is drowned out by noise. The algorithm doesn't reward depth. It rewards engagement. And engagement comes from emotion, not importance. This suggests some lessons. First, we need to actively cultivate better historical memory. Teaching and learning about forgotten heroes is part of that. When you learn about nuclear weapons, learn about Petrov and Arkhipov. When you learn about vaccines, learn about Hilleman and Zhandanov. When you use a seatbelt, think about Bolin. These shouldn't be obscure facts. They should be common knowledge. Second, we need to value prevention as much as response. Preventing disasters is harder to recognize, but more important than managing disasters after they occur. The person who strengthens a building before an earthquake saves more lives than the person who rescues people after. But the rescue gets media coverage. The building inspector doesn't. We need to invert that somehow. Celebrate the people who make disasters not happen.
Third, we need to recognize that heroism comes in many forms. Physical courage is one type. Moral courage is another. Intellectual courage matters too. The willingness to stand against group consensus, to trust your judgment over procedure, to make decisions under uncertainty with enormous stakes. Petrov and Arkhipov showed this type of courage. So did many others. We should honor it. Fourth, we need to be suspicious of simple narratives. History is complex. Individual actions matter, but so do systems, luck, timing, supporting cast. When we learn about historical events, we should ask who gets mentioned and who gets forgotten, whose perspective is centered, what uncomfortable details are omitted. The fuller story is usually more complex and more interesting than the simple version. Fifth, we need to maintain epistemic humility. We don't know all the close calls, the near misses that never became public, the disasters prevented by people whose names we'll never learn, the accidents that almost happened, the system failures that almost cascaded. We survived to the present, but the path was probably narrower than we realize. Remembering this promotes caution, improves systems, and encourages gratitude. The sun is setting now, metaphorically. We've walked through these stories of forgotten heroes, people who changed the world and then disappeared from memory. The pattern is clear. Prevention is invisible. Technical work is undervalued. Institutional credit obscures individual contribution. Dramatic narratives overshadow complex realities. And we forget because remembering is difficult and uncomfortable.
But forgetting has costs.
We lose role models. We fail to learn lessons. We repeat mistakes. We undervalue the work that actually keeps civilization functioning. We celebrate the wrong people and ignore the right ones. The people who save millions of lives should matter more than the people who score touchdowns or win elections. But they don't, and that's a problem we should address. There are more forgotten heroes. We could talk about Francis Oldham Kelsey, the FDA medical officer who blocked thalidomide from being approved in the United States in the 1960s. Thalidomide was a morning sickness drug that caused severe birth defects. It was approved and used in Europe and Canada. Thousands of children were born with deformed limbs. Kelsey insisted on more safety data before approval. She faced intense pressure from the pharmaceutical company. She held firm. American children were spared. She received an award from President Kennedy, but then faded from memory. Most people have never heard of her. She saved thousands of American children from disability and saved the FDA's reputation from catastrophic failure. Or Norman Borlaug, agricultural scientist who developed high-yield wheat varieties that prevented mass starvation. The Green Revolution in agriculture during the 1960s and 70s increased food production dramatically. Estimates suggest Borlaug's work saved over 1 billion lives. 1 billion! He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. He was better recognized than many people on this list, but even so, most people today couldn't identify him or describe his work. 1 billion lives saved. He should be famous. He should be taught in every school. But he's not.
Or Henrietta Lacks, though her case is different. She didn't choose to be a hero. Her cells were taken without consent in 1951 when she was being treated for cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The cells, called HeLa cells, were the first human cells that could survive and reproduce indefinitely in lab culture. They revolutionized medical research. HeLa cells have been used in research that led to vaccines, cancer treatments, HIV/AIDS treatments, and countless other medical advances. Lacks died of her cancer at age 31. For decades, her family didn't know her cells were being used. She received no recognition or compensation. Her story has become more known recently, partly through Rebecca Skloot's book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. But for 50 years, her contribution was invisible. The cells were famous. The person was forgotten. Or James Harrison, Australian man with unusual antibodies in his blood. His blood contains antibodies for Rh disease, a condition where a pregnant woman's blood attacks her fetus. Harrison donated blood over 1,000 times across 60 years. His donations created the medication that prevents Rh disease. His blood saved an estimated 2.4 million babies. He's called the man with the golden arm. He received awards in Australia, but internationally, he's virtually unknown. 2.4 million lives saved through consistent, unglamorous donation of blood. That's heroic. It should be widely recognized. The list could continue. For every famous person in history, there are dozens of equally or more important people whose names are forgotten. This isn't because we lack information. In many cases, the information exists. It's in archives, academic papers, databases.
But information isn't knowledge. Knowledge isn't memory. Memory requires active maintenance, cultural transmission, and deliberate teaching. Without that, people fade.
What do we do with this? How do we remember better? Some suggestions. First, when you learn about historical events, look for the supporting cast. History classes teach about leaders and major figures, but read deeper. Find the people who did the actual work. The scientists, engineers, administrators, workers who made things happen. Their stories are usually more interesting and more instructive than the famous person who gets credit. Second, value technical competence. We live in a technological civilization. The people who make technology work, who solve engineering problems, who maintain complex systems are essential. They deserve recognition and respect. When something works reliably, thank the people who made it work. When disaster is prevented, acknowledge the prevention. This requires conscious effort because success is invisible. Third, teach your children about different types of heroes, not just warriors and leaders. Scientists, doctors, engineers, civil servants, people who saved lives through competence and dedication, people who made unglamorous choices that had an enormous positive impact. Expand the definition of heroism beyond physical courage to include moral courage, intellectual integrity, and technical excellence. Fourth, support institutions that maintain memory. Museums, libraries, educational institutions, they do the work of preserving and teaching history. They're often underfunded and undervalued. Support them. Visit them. Learn from them. The work of memory is collective and institutional. Individual efforts aren't enough.
Fifth, question narratives. When you hear a simple story about how something happened or why something matters, dig deeper. The simple version is usually incomplete or distorted. Real history is complex. Real achievement is usually collective. Real heroes are usually flawed humans doing their best in difficult circumstances. The complexity is valuable. It makes history more human and more useful. The darkness is settling now. We've spent time with people who changed the world and then were forgotten. Petrov in his bunker, making an impossible choice. Zhdanov argued in committees for a program that seemed impossible. Arkhipov refused to launch the weapon that would have ended everything. Bolin designed a seatbelt and gave it away. Hilleman develops vaccines in his lab year after year, saving millions of lives per year. Kelsey holding the line against pharmaceutical pressure. Borlaug worked in fields to feed billions. Lax unknowingly contributing her cells to medical research. Harrison donated blood for decades. These people were not perfect. They had flaws, made mistakes, lived ordinary lives in many ways. But at crucial moments, they made choices or contributions that altered history. And then, history forgot them. That forgetting is our collective failure. We fail to remember what matters. We fail to honor genuine achievement. We fail to teach future generations about the people whose work created the world they inherit. But we can do better. Memory is a choice. Recognition is a choice. We can choose to remember the forgotten heroes. We can teach their stories. We can think about them when we use their inventions, benefit from their programs, and exist because of their decisions. We can build cultures that value prevention, competence, and genuine contribution over drama, celebrity, and surface achievement.
The night is quiet now. The stories have been told. The heroes remembered, at least for tonight. Tomorrow, their names might fade again from memory. That's the nature of forgetting. It's constant, inexorable, unless we fight it. But the fighting is worth doing, because these people matter. Their work matters, and we owe them the respect of being remembered. Sleep well, knowing that you exist partly because people you've never heard of made good decisions at crucial moments, made inventions they gave away, developed medicine they didn't profit from, prevent disasters you'll never experience. The forgotten heroes who changed the course of time. Their names may fade, but their impact remains. In the world we inhabit, in the lives we live, in the simple fact that we're here at all, thinking about them in the quiet darkness. And perhaps that's enough. Not fame, not glory, just the quiet knowledge that the work mattered. Those lives were saved, that the world continued because someone made a difficult choice, pursued an unglamorous goal, gave away an invention, or simply refused to follow a procedure that would have ended everything. The forgotten heroes, remembered tonight, honored in the telling, present in the grateful acknowledgement that we stand on foundations they built, even if we never learned their names. Rest now. The stories will be here tomorrow. The lesson remains. Remember the forgotten. Honor the invisible. Value the preventive. Recognize the technical. And when you have the opportunity, be the person who does the right thing, even if no one will remember. Because being remembered isn't the point. The point is the work itself. The lives saved. The disasters prevented. The world is made slightly better by competence, courage, and care. Good night. Sleep peacefully. The forgotten heroes watch over history, their work echoing forward, even in silence.